Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're all very welcome to this morning's webinar. I'm just going to share my slides. This morning's webinar is number 11 in the Irish Bioenergy Association webinar series 2020. Our topic this morning is biogas, an update from a European perspective. We're delighted to continue our webinar series, and just by way of introduction, for some new participants which are joining us this morning for the first time, the Irish Bioenergy Association is the representative body on the island of Ireland for the biomass, biogas, biofuels, biochar, wood fuels and energy crop sectors. And further details about the organisation can be found on our website, www.erbia.org. The agenda for this morning's webinar is we're delighted to be joined by Harman Decker, Director of the European Biogas Association. So we will have a presentation from Harman, and then we will proceed to a panel discussion, and that will incorporate Noel Gavigan, our Erbia Technical Executive, and there will be an opportunity for you to post your questions through the chat or Q&A tab or chat tab at the bottom of the screen, and we will endeavour to answer as many of your questions as possible. This is the fourth of webinar in a series of biogas focused webinars, and the first three, being webinar number 8, 9 and 10, focused on policy and action needed to mobilise the biogas industry. In webinar 9, we looked at the potential for small scale on farms, and the most recent one, webinar number 10, focused on digestate from biogas as a biofertilizer. Just to remind you that all recordings and presentations from both webinars and all the previous webinars are available on our website, and we are currently planning our webinar series for 2021. So if any member or stakeholder would like to present, please contact us through the two emails addresses shown there for myself or my colleague Teresa O'Brien. Our next webinar will take place on the 2nd of December at the same time. Our topic will be on, we will receive a perspective from a representative from the World Bioenergy Association, and full details will be published in the coming days through our social media channels. We thank you for joining this morning, and we do hope that you can join us at our next webinar. By way of introduction for this morning's topic, there's significant potential for the biogas industry at an Irish level. This webinar will address the latest developments across Europe. The Irish Bioenergy Association is a member of the EBA, and this morning we will receive an overview of the biomethane market across Europe. We will discuss the latest policy developments at a Brussels level, and we will hear from the EBA about the important role that biogas and biomethane have to play in decarbonising both our heat, electricity and transport sectors across Europe. Our speaker this morning is Harman Decker. Harman has worked for 15 years within the sustainability sector and has devoted his time to the mitigation of climate change. He has built his career in the water and gas sector, which he has held various management positions. He joined EBA after 5 years of service at DMT Environmental Technology. As a manager for business development, he worked on the expansion of the biogas sector in new geographical regions. During those years, he has focused on the implementation of new techniques, valorising biogas, such as bio-LNG, and these responsibilities include the analysis of future opportunities to produce biomethanol and bioplastics. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Harman to you this morning. I thank him very much for taking the time out of his busy schedule to present to us this morning. So it's now over to you, Harman, to give us your presentation. So I'll just stop sharing, and that will allow you to share your slides. Thanks, Harman.
Thank you, Sean, and many thanks for the invite to speak. I'm really honored to give a small presentation and also have some good discussions. Looking forward to that within the question and answer section. And I'm also very curious to learn a little bit more about what the Irish perspective is and what the participants are thinking about it. So yeah, I'm all geared up for the presentation. So let me see if I can share my screen and show what's happening within Europe. just want to have a confirmation. If you see my...
Yes, we see it, Harman, yes. We do.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks.
Good. So let me then first talk a bit about what the EBA is doing, because we are an association which is focusing actually on the framework which is set for biogas within Europe. So with some core competencies, one is driven on policy. So we are daily business is to speak with the different directorates within Europe, the departments, but also MEPs and even the cabinet of Timmermans. We are discussing how biogas sector is going to help actually the climate change. For that, we also represent a large member section, so we provide a platform for our members. So in total, that is around about 38 countries we are now represent within Europe. And funnily enough, in the last 1.5, 2 years, we get also a lot of members from outside Europe, suppliers from equipment from, say, the USA, as well as universities from all over the world wanting to join also our scientific advisory board. So if you look indirectly, because all the national biogas associations related to biogas or bioenergy are member of the EBA, we represent indirectly around about 7,000 stakeholders. Looking at that, we are probably one of the largest associations within Europe. Directly, if you look to the number of members, it is over 100 members at this moment, but growing very fast. And I will get to that later, why that is. We reckon that there is, and it's always a little bit difficult to calculate, but there is around about 70,000 jobs related to the biogas sector within Europe. And we think that it goes up easily to around about 275 direct jobs in the AD world of Europe. So what does this mean? Where are we standing with our biogas sector within Europe? Biogas has been around for many years, as you probably know even better than I do, but biogas is being recognized for its versatility. As we started many years ago, just providing biogas to produce electricity or to treat some waste, we nowadays are, I would say, in a kind of transition. Just to give you some numbers, we have up to date 18,202 plants. Actually, this is the number of 2018. I know that the number of 2019 is already 18,855 biogas plants throughout Europe. A huge number. Most of them, apart from round about 720 plants, all the rest is producing electricity. If we look at that, the installed electricity capacity is 11,000, say around 11,000 megawatt capacity. Now, we are going to look at this number a little bit differently. Why is that? Because the biogas sector in Europe is slowly changing. Where I said in the beginning, it is already a versatile sector. We have produced green electricity already for a long time. Green electricity is good because we are providing a continuous stream of green electricity, which is different than from wind and solar, because you need both wind or sun to produce your green electricity, but we have a steady flow. However, wind and solar are being or having made their cost competitiveness better over the past few years, and now they are cheaper than biogas plants in the production. So we see that wind and solar are overtaking the biogas production, electricity production. Now, if you look at the number of 11,000 megawatt capacity, it is not a fair comparison really, because if you have biogas, biogas itself has a higher energy content than just the electricity capacity. So what you will see is in our next reports, which we're bringing out, and the first one is due in January, we will express everything in the total energy capacity of the biogas. Why would we do that? Because the second say route we can go to is to produce biomethane. And biomethane is being on the rise in Europe. So if you look at those numbers, we see a large increase of biomethane production within Europe over the last, say, 10 years. And by now we have around about 720 biomethane plants, and this is rising very quickly. If you look and go back to my previous slides, where you have this 11,000 megawatt installed capacity of electricity, if you convert that to the potential of biomethane, we are way higher in installed capacity or biomethane production than related to the energy content, if you still follow me. So this means that with the existing plants we have already within Europe, we could produce already 16 billion cubic meters of biomethane. Now, I'm not saying that we are far in favor of biomethane as opposed to electricity, although I do say that biomethane is a solution for our industry to provide as well. And of course, it has a higher efficiency than just electricity or the combined electricity and heat. What does this mean for Europe? In Europe, we have set the 2020 targets in 2007. And there was a needed greenhouse gas emission cut for 20% on the renewables and 20% improvement on energy efficiency. Now, probably most of you know already, many countries have not made this level. Despite that, the European Parliament is pushing for higher targets and higher goal to reach by 2030. So we jump from 20% cutting greenhouse gas to in 2030 to 55%. That's still under debate, but it's most likely that it will be 55%. If not, it will be higher. But I think 55% will be already very hard for many countries to make. Also, the share of renewable energy needs to be higher, at least 32%. It's under review, and I will not be surprised if that will come higher. And the energy efficiency needs to improve as well. Now, by 2050, we want to be climate neutral. And the Green Deal, which is now in Europe, is actually, how do you say this in English? Many other countries are following suit. Even China has announced that they want to be climate neutral, although they have not put it in law. And we all hope that, of course, that the United States will return to a better ambition to the climate. So what does this mean? We have the European Green Deal, but the problem is that a lot of areas are influencing the total climate impact. You cannot focus only on, for example, electricity, if that doesn't really improve, for example, how farms are working. So here, the European Commission had made a quick overview on which sectors are influenced by the European Green Deal. Just to pick out a few which are of importance, although all of them are connected to biogas. If you look at, for example, on the left bottom corner, the financing of the transition, it's not very sexy to talk about. However, if you look at the financing and the taxonomy which is related to that, it is very important, because if our industry is not being recognized as sustainable within the finance, the support, we cannot make big investments, although it is needed. So we are working very hard to ensure that the taxonomy recognizes biogas, not only biogas, but also ensures that, for example, the gas infrastructure in Europe is being reckoned as a investment which is worth doing to ensure that also biomethane is there. For the same part, also rural economic development is needed in countries like in Ireland, but also in Poland and other countries. And if investments are not being made, then it's difficult to get this as well. Another part I would like to highlight is a little bit more on the right, is the farm to fork strategy. Now, the farm to fork strategy, you probably are aware of that, but they are trying to ensure a few things at farmers level. One is to ensure that the farmers are contributing to a neutral or maybe a more positive impact on the environment. The second one is to ensure that the farmers can help to mitigate climate change. Also, which is a very important topic right now in Europe, is the loss of biodiversity, both from soil biodiversity as well as from the crops which are growing and the impact it has on the environment itself. The farmers are, of course, key to food security, which is important in the farm to fork strategy. And of course, it needs to stay affordable. And the funny thing is, if you look at all those 5 items which Europe has put on the plate of farm to fork, biogas is making an impact. We can, for example, make a very positive impact on the greenhouse gas emissions. Sorry about that. But also the loss of biodiversity we can reverse just by use of digestate, bringing it back to the soil and ensure that the soil is going to be improved. We can afford also to ensure that the farmers get an extra income beside what they are doing to supply the food. So we have several ways on how to tackle them. Just a glimpse of items where biogas is making an impact on and where we as EBA are working on a daily basis. So in the summary, what is the contribution of biogas? If you look, for example, INEA Consulting put this in a box where they said, yes, energy consumers, they need dispatchable energy, both biomethane as well as electricity. The farmers need to have reduced use of mineral fertilizers, because if we use digestate, you don't have to use as much mineral fertilizers or chemical fertilizers as being used. And the bio-waste producers can handle their waste in a different way and at the same time reduce their cost because they get some income from the biogas. Important in all this, and we can't stress that enough within Europe, is that we are there to help a little bit more than just on the energy side. We are there also to improve the, say, sustainable practices of farmers by applying the digestate to ensure that secondary cropping is there. And there are various ways on how to do that. So how does this look like? And I'm trying to go to the next slide. There it is. This is a picture with regard to how secondary cropping or cover cropping can help as well for the biodiversity side. Basically, it shows how everything is interlinked, either by the production of biomethane or by the production of electricity. Why I'm picking out especially now sequential cropping. We all know that there is a large discussion within Europe with regard to energy crops, because we all know that land needs to be used for food. So we are not against that, and actually we are in favor of that. I think we need to have food production as prime within Europe. However, there are many ways on how to handle it. If food production is not necessary, of course, you should be able to put some crops on the field, which can be used for energy production, but in a sustainable way. Sequential cropping, cover cropping, can be used to do so. And at the same time, nitrogen is being less emitted from the arable lands. We can make sure that digestate is putting back to the land as well. We can foster carbon sequestration as well. So we have a lot of extra to put in. And actually this is being recognized by various reports, not made by the EBA, but also by the European Commission even. So if we look at one of those, and I'm just mentioning which reports, for example, this report where I'm showing here the graph from is from Navigant, which came out early this year. But we have recently also the Eurogas report. SERI made a report on behalf of the European Union. And we have also a Trinomics report, CE Delft, and I can go on for a while. And they all looked at the potential of biogas in future, and specifically in biomethane for future. And if we want to do it right, and we don't use energy crops, but we use sustainable cropping, we use manure, then we arrive at a minimum of 1170 terawatt hours on a yearly basis. That means around about 95 billion cubic meters on an annual basis we can produce for Europe by 2050. That is a minimum. Other reports are going even higher. So a way to go, because at this moment we produce only 3 billion cube. So where does it go to? 4 industries are being selected. Heavy road transport, or road transport in general. The other one is power. We still need dispatchable power to some extent. Industry will need also a part of that. And I think in this report, industry is being looked at maybe not so good. I think industry can take a lot more. I have examples from the steel industry in Sweden, which are going to switch to biomethane completely. So there are some, I think there are some lead ways to go there as well. And of course, within the buildings. How are we going to ensure that this is going to happen? We are working on various trajectories. One of them is that we are trying to see if biogas can be, how do you say, ported by an obligatory feed-in percentage within the gas grid. How that needs to be formed and how we are going to do that, that is open. But the talks are already now within Europe to have at least 10% renewable gas, not only biomethane, can be also hydrogen by 2030, and then raise that even further. Talks are even going further than 10% and maybe even 15%. How that looks like, we do not know yet, but those are the types of things we are looking at, but also for the transport. For example, in the maritime world, we need to change our fuels and we can provide bio-LNG. So there are many ways on how we can ensure that biogas and biomethane is there for the future. So to conclude, because I can go on for hours, we need to adopt a system where biogas is being recognized as more than just energy. We fulfill a central role within agriculture, waste, and energy. We can handle the waste, we can provide sustainable agriculture, and we provide energy on top of that. And we are actually the only fuel at this moment of sizable or scalable size, I have to say, which can do this. then of course the scope of sustainability needs to be there, that it's not only about carbon reductions, but also on other benefits for our environment. So we need to have a bioeconomy which can offer solutions for a total system, for animals, for plants, for air quality, for all that. And we play a role in that. So I think we have our work cut out within Europe, and we are pushing very hard. Just want to mention one thing which is of importance in the coming years. We are very happy that a methane strategy has come out from Europe. That is, I believe, 4 weeks ago, where the European Union is pushing for even biogas to put in place, also at agriculture and waste level, to ensure that the natural occurring methane emissions are being captured. And at the same time, of course, we can bring back the digestate to the land and give some extra income to the farmers. So having said all that, I'm sure there might be some questions, and otherwise I'm very curious to learn about the Irish situation as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Herman, for your presentation. So just to remind our participants this morning, and we have a nice attendance this morning, to post your questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and we will endeavour to answer as many of them as possible. So I'd now ask Noel Gavigan to join us as well from the Irish Bioenergy Association to join the panel discussion. So Herman, thanks very much for your presentation. It was valuable to get an insight into the development of the biomethane sector at a European level. I suppose just the first question I'd have is, and maybe going back to the slide, we don't need to refer back to it, the slide that you showed in terms of the carbon neutral Europe. It seems to me that at a European level, there's a large consideration in terms of the use of hydrogen for trying to achieve that climate carbon neutral target. So maybe you just want to elaborate on your views on that and its potential, and also how it's ahead of biomethane in terms of the targets for 2050.
Yes, and a good question, because we have sometimes a difficult message to give to Europe, because we are not only about energy. We influence many sectors, and that is for a politician sometimes difficult to understand, because it's not an easy message to give to the public if you have not one single message, but you have more than one. So, and hydrogen, of course, is easy to understand. It was one single message and comes from, when you do it right, comes from green electricity. Now, we see that we need all renewable energies for the future. You cannot say biomethane is the only key. So we need hydrogen as well. So what we have done within the EBA is we are part of the Gas for Climate group, for example, where the gas transmission system operators in Europe are being gathered. And there we are discussing on how the future looks like, for example, with hydrogen on one hand, but also biomethane. And we predict, if we go to, say, the total use of renewable gases in future, by 2050, it will be, hopefully, depending on how hydrogen is going to develop, it will be around about 2/3 hydrogen gas, 1/3 biomethane. It is around those areas. So we need both of them if we want to have renewable gas. But if we do it in that way, the gas supply is 100% renewable, and it's all being decarbonized. So that is important. And also maybe just to touch upon that, should we go to a full hydrogen economy, which at this moment I do not believe that will be possible, then of course biogas can be used for producing green hydrogen as well. So we are not at the end, we are actually at the beginning. and we are very versatile within our sector.
Okay, and just a very interesting observation and question here from James, who's the chair of the RBA Transport Subgroup. The consultation on RED 3 was published yesterday. Biomethane is only mentioned twice and hydrogen 41 times. Do you think biogas stroke methane is being supported in the Commission's Green Deal legislative programme for 2030?
Simple answer is yes. Because if hydrogen is being mentioned within the RED 2, the RED 2 is all about biofuels.
I think James was referring to the RED 3 consultation in
the
consultation on RED
2.
3. It was how it was published yesterday, and
yeah,
mentioned 41 times hydrogen, twice for biomethane.
Yeah, still though, it is all with regard to how hydrogen can be used in the total, coming from either green electricity or from feedstocks as we use, so bio-waste, for example. If they need hydrogen from bio-waste, they need to reckon that bio-waste is valuable. So if there is a big push for hydrogen, it will help biomethane as well. So there is, although it is a little bit a shame that biomethane is maybe not mentioned, I'm not so worried about that. If we look at the transport sector in general, especially if you look for localized transport for tractors and all that, you will see an upsurge from that use of biomethane localized, produced by farmers in the tractors, and also biomethane, for example, for the shipping industry. And don't forget, hydrogen is on top of minds of a lot of politicians, and it's nice to know, but it's not scalable yet. So they're talking about a lot of those projects, and there will be a lot of larger projects coming online, but the industry which is scalable at short term is the biomethane industry.
Okay, and just to maybe before we leave the hydrogen discussion, in terms of the fossil gas grid which exists across the European Union, how equipped is that from a technical perspective to carry hydrogen? And is that going to pose a challenge in terms of the widespread rollout or deployment of hydrogen across Europe? Maybe if you could just comment on that.
Yeah, okay. So this is a issue, of course, because we have the gas networks. We must use the gas networks to ensure that we are using renewable gas, of course. Hydrogen can be used within the gas networks till about, say, 15 to 20% without the need for changing the appliances. However, we need to ensure that if hydrogen is in the gas grid, that it is of a steady content and doesn't fluctuate. And there you have an issue. So what you will see is that there is already talks about dedicated hydrogen networks, first to supply to the industries and maybe at a later scale also to the housing. And although there are projects going on with regard to housing, so buildings being heated with hydrogen, those are very specific projects, and even the Hydrogen Europe is considering that the industry needs to supply supplied with green hydrogen first. After that, maybe the network is being also changed to others. But yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Harman. Just to bring in Noel there. Noel, we had a webinar last week which focused on the benefits of digestate from a biofertilizer perspective. Can you just maybe summarize for participants the main points that were raised in terms of the benefits of digestate for use in agriculture? And then I'll ask Harman to come in to comment further on what his views are in terms of the various regulations around digestate as a fertilizer.
Yeah, basically what we looked at previously was there's many different projects going on looking at digestate here in Ireland as how it can be utilised correctly as a fertiliser and what impact it will have. We have very little experience here in Ireland in dealing with digestate as an entity. And so there's quite a bit. We have our agricultural setup here is different from other EU countries. We do see in all other forms of agriculture, we do our own research here because our environment is different. Our agricultural practices are different. So it's important that we do our own independent research. So there was some very good research done through NUIG in Teagasc, looking at use of digestate. Predominantly, it was looking at things such as pathogen kill, the process of configuration, how you'd optimize the system for that, and also looking at the reaction in field and the potential for runoff. So the pasteurization efficiency was obviously a critical thing from an animal byproducts point of view, and how we ensure that the material going out is not going to cause any difficulties. And then the land spreading and runoff trials were predominantly looking at what is there a macroeconomic effect here, because we are all very well aware that when you're using slurry on farmland, there is the potential for runoff, there is the potential for nutrients to leach into groundwater or into surface water streams. So the piece of research had looked at that. There is a lower potential for digestate. It seems to cling better onto the crop or onto the soil. So it does appear to be slightly less likely to run off, which is very beneficial to see. And also because its uptake is better, it tends not to have a higher potential for runoff. So it was quite interesting to get some detailed analysis on that to be able to determine what benefits it would have in terms of nutrients. Again, that presentation is on the website, so people could go back and have a look at that.
Okay, thanks, Noel. And just Herman, to bring you back in then, can you just give any update you have on the recognition of digestate as a fertilizer, whether it can be classified as an organic or inorganic source, and its effect on maybe nutrient management planning and its benefit to, or what have the EBA been doing in this regard, or have you any insight into this particular topic?
This is a topic, first of all, not the topic which is my role and expertise, but there are a few within the EBA which are very much of an expert. We're working together as well with ECN, the European Compost Network, as well closely, as it is important that those two roles are intermingled. We have within the EBA working group basically on or focused on digestate. And there is the University of Ghent and Wageningen doing a lot of research also on the digestate, on how that can be applied. I just want to mention one thing, and I'm sure I'm aware I'm not going to answer your question, but I think it's related. So the University of Wageningen has researched the soil quality at this moment in the Netherlands. Actually, they said that although if you have an aerial view, it looks all beautiful and green in the Netherlands, but if you look at the soil quality itself, it's a desert. And then they checked what the mold ratio was within the soil, which is important for the roots to grow. And there they're doing now the research, because they have seen that chemical fertilizers have minimized the humus and mold content within the soil. And they're doing now the research, and they're seeing the first results already, that if you apply digestate, and of course also compost, but especially also digestate, it raises again the humus and the mold content of the soil, which is very much needed for healthy soil. So having said that, I know I have not answered your question. So I only think if there are any specific questions with regard to that, I would like to take them home, and I'll come back to you on that.
No problem. I suppose that's an important point about the digestate, and we saw that in the presentations last week. And I would know farmers that have commented to me that they now use digestate instead of fertilizer on their, slurry, raw slurry on their lands, and that they would never go back to using raw slurry again, giving haven't seen the results which they've retained or attained through the use of digestate. So there is some very positive and practical examples there of the benefits that farmers are seeing through the use of digestate in Ireland, even though we have only a small number of biogas plants, that and the availability of digestate is obviously quite low as a result. There's a question here in from Gary, and I suppose it just comes back to the maybe the initial discussions we had over the last number of weeks about the various scales of biogas production, which are potential in Ireland and are in existence across Europe. Gary's specific question is on affordable technology for gas upgrading at small farm scale. So would you have any insight into that particular topic, Harman, in terms of it's quite specific, but I suppose we would think that there's two scales that we should be talking about in Ireland. One at a small scale, meaning farm scale, where it's satisfying an energy demand on a farm and utilizing the existing farm waste and residues. And then the medium to large scale model of biogas or biomethane, where your centralized plants fed from a catchment area by a multiple a number of farmers in the area and also other waste producers, and then you're exporting that energy to the grid, either the electricity grid or the gas grid. So this question is specifically around the farm scale, and are you aware of any developments around the technology in that space, or would you have any feedback from any of the other EBA members on this particular scale of biogas production?
Yes and no. It is my field of expertise because I come from the upgrading side. So I can answer that, yes, there are some developments going on and people are looking for new breakthrough technologies where membranes was on the upgrading side, a technology which broke through in 2011 and is now predominantly being used in upgrading. Still, we would like to lower the costs of upgrading. Now, yes, there will be some new things coming up, but I don't expect there will be a large breakthrough anymore for a long time. Looking at the different technologies and researches which are going on, that maybe we can look after or look for, say, a 15% reduction on the capital investment. And maybe also around about 10 to 15% in the energy use of those techniques, but that's it. However, I think more importantly is where we have to look at is two other things. Biogas and biomethane is being now judged or priced at only the energy content. That is something we need to change because we have too many positive externalities which we are not being paid for. One is, of course, minimization of chemical fertilizers, but also soil improvement. And as we are now talking with the European Commission on the methane strategy, if they want to prevent methane, natural occurring methane emissions, then especially those small scale farmers and digesters are playing a big role. I think there will be two things happening, or three things happening. One is, of course, over time, the price will come down a little. Don't expect, well, to my current knowledge, don't expect large reductions there. Second is that we need to monetize on the positive externalities which we have. So we need to work on that. We need to make sure that it's being recognized and that it's being supported as well. The third is that you will see, and that is the market mechanisms that over a period of 10, 15 years, trading mechanisms on CO2 will impact also positively our sector. At this moment, the ETS system is at 25 euros a ton for a CO2. We expect that to go up in a few years' time to 50. We need to go up to maybe 75 to 90 euros the ton to ensure that biogas is being supported in the right way. Maybe also to add to that, we don't need to stop there. We still have the CO2 which is there, which we currently do not use. and we can liquefy them and dispose the fossil CO2. We can use the organic CO2 instead, which is of course already a positive effect. We can do BECCS, so bioenergy CCS. We can even make bioplastics from CO2. So there are many other ways as well to further valorize and monetize on what we are doing. So my message is, yes, there will be some reductions, but don't think that will be very large. It is more that we need to focus on all the other positive externalities and to get support for that.
Okay, thanks, Harman. And just to make, I suppose, feedback to Gary, we can maybe discuss offline with you about some technologies in this area, and we have contacts that we can put you in touch with that might be able to give you further information and details on this particular topic of upgrading at a farm scale. Noel, do you want to come in on this point just to give your insight?
Yeah, just I suppose one thing that's been pursued here, and it'd be interesting to hear Harman's view on it, and that is where currently, a lot of the upgrading that's going on, really the focus and the target is to get biomethane up to a level that you can put it into the gas grid. At which point there's quite detailed standards to meet in terms of very high biomethane content. Sometimes you might have to add in another gas to get it up to the proper CV value, but especially here in Ireland. But we're talking about levels of above 97, 98% methane in the gas. There is some discussion going on here in terms of if we're and that's the target, when we're looking at biomethane there. But there is some discussion going on that if we're looking at using it as a vehicle fuel, we could look at upgrading to maybe 92%, because it'll still run on those engines, but the costs of upgrading are far less, because it's getting those last couple of percent of carbon dioxide out is where a lot of the high cost is. So do we just, that's a discussion going on here if we're looking at say a captive fleet and fueling certain fleets. It might be a lower cost option. Now, I'm not too sure. I know some have looked at that across Europe, and some of the original upgrading systems were looking at that. But is there any developments across Europe in that level, or?
Not that I'm aware of, but I can concur that around about, say, 94, 95%, the techniques are, most of the techniques are simple. Of course, you have chemical scrubbing, which goes immediately to a higher content. And if you look to how you pay for it, of course, it's still on the energy content. Now, looking at the CAPEX investment, it does make sense to go a little bit lower. So yeah, that would be worth looking at. I'm not aware of discussion, and that's a good question. So I will have a look into it if there is anything towards that. But if you, I mean, the engines can perfectly run on a lower Bobby index. So yeah, 95% is okay. I know that in Thailand, for example, they work with 82%. So there is enough leadway. Only, of course, the more you lower it, then the more gas you need to transport as well, which is not energy efficient. So I think maybe around about 95, maybe a little bit lower is possible. I'll discuss this with NGVA as well. Good point.
Okay, thanks very much, Harman. Just to follow on from that, and there's a number of questions coming in, and we'll come back to the questions just in 1 second, but a point on the uses for biomethane. I think the slide is quite interesting from the EU perspective, that the focus is very much on heavy transport and maritime traffic or decarbonisation, with probably less of a focus on the heat sector, and as a result, the industrial sector isn't receiving as much focus as maybe the transport sector. So can you just maybe outline what you believe is the logic behind this? We can understand it from an Irish perspective that the most value for biomethane or biogas can be got from the transport sector compared to the heat sector. Obviously, there's a place for biomethane in all sectors. But can you maybe just further elaborate on that particular point, the focus on transport rather than heat?
So if you look at this study, this is being made by Navigant as a result of the Gas for Climate Consortium, where we are part of. And in this this consortium, the TSOs do believe that hydrogen will be supplying the heat sector, so our buildings mainly in future. The EBA itself think we still play a fairly big role, especially in the rural areas. Maybe in the larger cities, it's not the case, and we can play a larger role in the industry as well. Looking at the transport, they focused on heavy transport, just because they do not believe, due to the tank-to-wheel approach of Europe, zero emissions of cars, that we stand a chance to put in biomethane for transport. However, this tank-to-wheel approach is under revision at this moment. So I'm not so certain, and I think biofuels can be used in some way or another, but we probably need another 1 or 2 years probably to get this off the ground. So I wouldn't focus as much on where it will be used. I just would focus on the biomethane is very versatile and can be used in many sectors.
Okay. Just a question in from Porrick here. What has been the most effective policy initiative or incentive that has stimulated the biomethane growth in the leading EU member states?
A fairly simple answer, that is direct stimulation of feeding in tariffs, because that gives a immediate, secure investment for your biomethane or biogas plant. And the investors love that because they know you have a 10 to 15 years time span to go for. I believe, though, it will be changing in future, and this is my personal opinion, but it will go more to a market-oriented approach, like within the heavy transport for bioenergy, for example, where there is an obligation of the fuel suppliers or obligation of the gas network operators to have a certain percentage of renewable gases. And within that, of course, the investments are less certain. But if you know that they need to step up every year in their renewable gas scenario, then we are sure that the price will stay steady as well.
Okay. I suppose just from an Irish context, support is very important, and we need to bridge that gap, the current gap of fossil gas, the price of fossil gas versus the cost of production of biogas or biomethane. And in our policy paper, the Irish Bioenergy Policy Paper, which we have worked and partnered with CRE to develop, we call for we outline a number of ways in which the Irish government could fund a biomethane sector, and that could be a mixture of market-driven supports plus also some exchequer supports. Go back to a couple of the other questions.
Can I just add,
sorry,
Sean?
Herman, yeah.
Yeah, just very quickly. I think especially in those countries where biomethane is still or biogas is still an infant stage, I do believe that it is necessary to kickstart the industry, to have support from the government, direct support,
Yes.
which then later is being translated to more market mechanisms, just to add.
Okay, thank you. And that's a sense that we are getting from our lobbying work as well, as the Department of Climate Action maybe would stimulate a percentage of biomethane through exchequer support, and then maybe move towards other supports like the Biofuels Obligation Scheme, like maybe PSO levies, other forms of support which would help the industry. I suppose one question on that, or follow-on question, do you see any member state that is using capital support as a way of getting a large-scale biomethane industry up and running? Or is that more potentially at a smaller scale that would work? Because we would believe it probably isn't possible to have a capital support intervention given the capital costs of development of biogas plants.
You're meaning capital subsidy on the capex itself?
Yes, in lieu of maybe a feed-in support.
Yes, there are some countries that are doing that, and I know that Poland has done it, for example, in the past on the biogas development. On top of my head, I don't know exactly which countries have done so. I believe even Denmark has done that to a certain extent. But it's not done many times. So.
Okay, we'll move on with the questions. Question again from James. I'm hearing big CNG customers in several countries say that they want biogas, but they stress that they want it from local sources. Likewise, biogas project developers seek public support for local projects. Do you see a trend towards protectionism, which will slow down the entire EU gas sector?
Yeah, good question, actually. I don't think that if they focus on localized production, it will actually prohibit the development of the biomethane section. It's just that the public is not very much known with biomethane, and for that it is for our industry to ensure that we let them know what the impact is of a biogas plant. For example, if you have a biogas plant which is producing, which is in the Netherlands where I come from, but if they're producing 500 cubic meters of biomethane, it will provide gas for heating of the homes and use for cooking and all that for 3,000 homes. Now, if you say that when a project is going to be developed and saying, look, here is a biogas plant and we are providing you with so much gas, then you get a lot of less resistance in realizing the project, because people are thinking, but it's for us and it's good for us because it's green. And therefore circular approaches, especially for cities, like handling their waste and having their buses and trucks driving on biomethane, it's only good to raise the awareness for biomethane, because we all know that larger scale is also needed, apart from the small scale, to ensure that we have renewable gas in future.
Okay, question here from Eric Herman. In the UK, propane is added to the biomethane to increase the CV of the gas before injecting into the grid. Is this standard practice in Europe, and will this be necessary for injection into the Irish grid?
Answer is no. I believe, I just spoke to Noel before, but I believe that in Ireland it is necessary, because you probably have similar system as in the UK. But in some countries it's necessary, some other countries it isn't. So in Germany it is necessary to have high caloric value. In the Netherlands we have a low caloric value gas, so we even have to add CO2 or nitrogen to lower the heating value. So
from what I'm taking, it depends on the specific country.
It does.
That's okay. Thank you. Noel, just a couple of questions there. Maybe you could come in on one from Osama. He makes the point that he reckons that anaerobic digestion processes are energy intensive. How do we cope with this? He calls it an ordeal. How do you?
Well, the energy recovery from it is significant. I mean, if you're dealing with a waste material, comparing biogas production and composting, obviously you're putting energy in composting. You're recovering a huge amounts of energy from a biogas plant from the same material. Look, I think the parasitic loads you would tend to see, depending on what technology you're in around 10% would be sort of a standard figure for a lot of plants. So there is a parasitic load there to keep it warm, and depending on what heat source you're using, but you need to keep the digester warm, you need to keep pumps running and things like that. So there is a parasitic load, but that's part and parcel of the operation. It's not something that causes a project to, it's something that's to be added into the figures, but it's something that's easily coped with.
Okay, thanks, Noel. Back to you, Herman. Two questions from a participant here. One is, will many biogas plants be connected to the Northern Lights CO2 grid? And the second question is regard to hydrogen. Where is the cost for hydrogen? And maybe you mightn't have that information. This participant says that they can't see how the EU can afford a large rollout in this decade. So maybe if you could comment and take both of those together, they're from the same
Okay,
attendee.
let me address first the first question, and the second question we need to elaborate it because I couldn't understand quite. But first question with regard to CO2 and I think injecting it into the CO2 grid. I would hope so, because if that will be doing, then of course we are creating negative CO2 emissions. And I have already some examples, especially from the Netherlands, where it's being done and can be done. So even if it's the CO2 is being used in industrial areas or it's being used for storage. Then the second question was from hydrogen fuel cells. Using
that's a separate one actually, but you can take that one if you want. So it was, can you comment on fuel cell technology and biomethane versus hydrogen?
Right. Okay. So easy one. Fuel cell technology or steam reforming technology to make hydrogen are both available, can be done, but it's expensive to do so and is of course not as energy efficient. However, having all said that, when you use or have a localized need of a dedicated stream of green hydrogen, it's excellent to do it that way because you have green hydrogen and you can use it for many purposes.
Okay, Noel, do you want to comment on the hydrogen and maybe just add any comment you have on that?
Yeah, just I suppose a quick one on the hydrogen. I suppose we looking at between it and biomethane, there's a term often used as the technology readiness and technology readiness level of different things that come about. But the hydrogen, it is something that a technology that's in development. It is something that there's not much commercially going on in hydrogen at the moment, but that's the plan is that there will be over the coming decades. But the biomethane is something that's on the ground. The technology has already been well developed. You can buy plant literally off the shelf, and it is something that's been rolled out. So when we're looking at different policy options over the coming decades, and in particular the coming decade, in the shorter term period, we have to consider the fact that the biomethane is something we can immediately embrace, whereas hydrogen, there's a lot more development required and a lot more investment required in a research part and a product development point and equipment development before it can be commercialized.
Okay, thanks, Noel. I think that's a very good concluding comment from yourself. Just one final, well, just go back, sorry, on the hydrogen, Harman. The second part of that question, the initial question was, where is the cost for H2? I can't see how the EU can afford a large rollout in this decade, was the comment. So maybe it's more of a comment than a question, and you probably don't have specific figures on the costings around hydrogen.
Yeah, the costing is around about €2 a kilo, which we need to achieve, but we can't. If you are doing either steam reforming or you go for fuel cell technology, you will be much higher in price, depending on the technology in the state and where it is going. So at this moment, it's not viable commercially, although there are some projects going on already.
Okay, and a final question because we're at our time limit. It's in from Joan, and thanks, Joan, for joining this morning. In Europe, has planning approval been an obstacle to building new biogas plants? Ireland has seen opposition / refusals of planning permissions in recent years for biogas plants. So maybe, Harman, if you could just comment on that, and that would be the concluding remark.
I will be brief. Yes, we see, like in every installation which is being built, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whether it's biogas plants, there is opposition. And for some reason, it's tending to be getting stronger and stronger, people not realizing that we need to change in our system and way of life. However, we think it will change. It will be in favor, but we need to tackle a few things, of course. We need to make sure that the biogas plants don't smell. We don't emit methane, and we capture and bring it back and have the local people benefit from it as well, to ensure that you have the buy-in as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Harman, for those remarks. And I think it is a very important topic around the whole planning permission area in Ireland in terms of biogas. And what we have seen ourselves from some applications which have gone in, a lot of it comes down to the level of consultation which is engaged with the various local stakeholders and local community, maybe in advance of an application being made. That has a significant effect on the potential levels of objections and discussion which happens. So at that, I'd like to conclude this morning's webinar. I'd like to thank you, Harman, for joining us this morning from the European Biogas Association. Erbia is a proud member of the European Biogas Association and becoming more involved in the EBA as we progress. I'd like to also thank Noel Gavigan for joining us this morning on our panel. And I'd like to particularly thank Teresa O'Brien, who behind the scenes ensures that this all rolls and runs smoothly. So thanks very much to Teresa for setting it all up and for helping and assisting in ensuring a smooth and rollout of our webinar series. So at that, we will conclude this morning's webinar, and I thank you all for joining. As I said at the start, the presentations and recordings are available or will be available on our website and are available for all our previous webinars. And we do look forward to welcoming you again in 2 weeks' time for our next webinar, which will be a presentation from the World Bioenergy Association, and probably move more towards a biomass topic compared to biogas, which has been the focus for the last number of weeks. So at that, I conclude and thank you all again. And thanks, Harman and Noel and Teresa, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.